Do you ever feel like that one image of Matthew McConaughey in True Detective where he's smoking really hard? We're doing the second edition of this video because there's been a lot of information getting dripped out slowly by the US Department of Justice as they slow walk their legally mandated release of the Epstein files, and even though it's apparently only a percentage or two of the total, it still comes in at more than 3 million pages or so. There is a lot more to come, and it might just blow this whole thing off course and ruin it in the future. Some of you will want to start digging deeper into some of these specific connections, so I will do my best to have it all laid out for you in a reference document linked in the description. If I have gotten anything egregiously wrong, then a pinned comment will have corrections. Some of this is going to sound relatively incoherent and unrelated, but I will do my best to tie it all back in at the end. Just trust the process. So, let's talk about how low tax banning hentai from Something Awful has led to the beginning of the American century of humiliation, for a second time, somehow, because the new Epstein files have proven that everything is related back to that guy. We're starting this timeline in 1995 now. In September, the web directory and search engine Magellan was publicly launched by a company founded by the twin sisters Christine and Isabel Maxwell. They're the older sister of Ghislaine Maxwell. It's really important to remember that every member of the Maxwell family is glowing super bright. Just remember, keep that in mind whenever they come up. We're going to jump forward to the 28th of June 1996. The company Excite announces they're acquiring the company that owns Magellan for $18 million. Following the acquisition, Magellan's technology was absorbed into Excite's own technology stack. 2 years later, in May of 1998, in a deal worth $70 million, Excite becomes one of the default search engines on the Netscape homepage. Netscape is the browser founded by Mark Andreessen and Jim Clark. And yes, that's the shape of Mark Andreessen's head. I have not photoshopped it in any way. It's 1999, and on the 30th of May in a college apartment in Conway, Arkansas, a man known as Hiroyuki Nishimura launched the website 2channel, an anonymous text board serving Japanese internet users. By being hosted in the United States, 2channel was able to bypass Japan's more restrictive censorship rules while still being accessible to its citizens. At its peak, it was Japan's most popular anonymous text board. In fact, a few years later, Google said that 2channel was the most searched word in Japan. Western internet users who stumbled across it couldn't navigate threads without a basic understanding of Japanese. Threads in English were either ignored, mocked, or deleted, but despite all that, there was some occasional cross-posting between the two cultures. That same year, Richard Lotex Kiyonka launches a comedy website called Something Awful. And unfortunately, it's all downhill from here. If you've ever been online and engaged with online culture, then there is a near 100% likelihood that your experience has been shaped by something that came out of the Something Awful forums. It's still active today, but nowhere near its glory days. Registering on Something Awful used to be free until a forum member registered over 50 accounts in a single day. To give some context to the younger viewers of the channel, this is the year 2000, where email addresses were much harder to come by. Tasty Armageddon was his name, and he's one of the main reasons why Lotex decided to start charging money to register an account on Something Awful, and thus the Brotherhood of $10 was born. Think of it like the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but for overweight, large adult sons living in their parents' basements. On the 30th of August 2001, the website Futaba Channel, sometimes called 2chan, is launched onto the World Wide Web. This was set up as a refuge for 2channel posters when that site was in danger of shutting down. Nishimura, the guy behind 2channel, has a bit of a track record of letting things fall apart, and Futaba Channel was made as a backup, just in case it happened again. To help with this plan, they made their codebase open source. This codebase is used to run Japanese and English image boards to this day. While this is happening in the East, back in the West, SomethingAwful.com continues to grow steadily, having thousands of active users daily at its peak. The problem with having such an active website is Lotex hated doing actual work. Whomst amongst us, really. But he also loved making money, and again, whomst amongst us, really. He'd actually considered turning registrations off entirely and just letting the website continue with everyone who was already registered. But with the paywall up, he was getting some consistent revenue in the form of registrations and re-registrations, because there was this recurring and consistently absurd event where those who caused the most trouble ended up just buying themselves new accounts and paying to unban themselves. All of these new users meant there were more posts, and more posts meant more topics flooding the forums. The dumping ground for topics without a specialist subforum was the General Bullshit Subforum, or GBS. If there's no anime forum, and I want to talk about anime, where else am I going to post about it? GBS, naturally. Unfortunately, Lotex hated anime, and he also hated when GBS would get flooded with one type of post. So when that happened, a new subforum would be made. Rather than banning anime outright, he made a new forum called ADTRW. ADTRW is currently an acronym for Animated Drawings to Replace Women. And right now, at the time of recording, it's called Vegeta. Originally, it unfortunately stood for the Anime Death Tentacle Rape Whorehouse. Not a great name, you can see why it was changed. But the name was meant to signal, hey, I think you're all weirdos with awful taste, here's your hole to hide in. And ADTRW became a place where the proto-weebs of the internet were kind of let loose to post, and they do for a few years. It's important to note that there is some crossover between these proto-weebs and Futaba channel. They know about each other and content is cross-posted between the two places. This is one of those times I'm going to have to take a little tangent for some cultural context. But during this period, and I would like to say all the way up until the early 2010s, the internet was really weirdly accepting about pedophiles existing openly on the internet. Do you remember PedoBear? That made me uncomfortable when I was younger. Reddit had r/jailbait for years and years until they cracked down on it after getting exposed by Anderson Cooper. And unfortunately, Something Awful wasn't really any exception to this. The name ADTRW, with its references to hentai and rape, had unfortunately signaled to genuine fans of that sort of stuff that their favorite kinds of content was tolerated there, even if it wasn't actually Lotax's intention. Basically, there was a lot of dubious anime girl posting, and it's going to be really important to remember this when we come back to ADTRW later. One of the people actively posting in ADTRW was a young man with the name Christopher Poole. At the time, he was a 15-year-old student in New York. You might know him by his username, Moot. On the 29th of September 2003, Moot registers 4chan.net, which he chose because it looked like 2chan.net. There are some other people who claim to have been involved in founding of 4chan, but for the sake of convenience, I'll just not go into that and kind of lay it squarely at his feet. Moot grabbed Futaba Channel's open source code and ran the Japanese text through Alta Vista's Babelfish translator to make it English friendly. That's where he got the term anonymous from. On the 1st of October 2003, 4chan officially launches. Before the end of the year, several new anime-related boards are added. H, C, D, L, W, Y, and A. Some boards were quickly removed when very illegal material was posted, and there's no prizes for guessing which one. This same year, SEC filings show Palantir was incorporated by Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, right when the CIA's Total Information Awareness program was defunded, and also why is he wearing Chris Chan's shirt? Before I continue explaining this part, I need to point out that this is just how I pronounce Mr. Thiel's name. I'm not doing it on purpose, it's just a coincidence with how my accent lines up. If you haven't heard of the Total Information Awareness program, it was based on the concept of predictive policing and was meant to detect, classify, and identify foreign terrorists by hoovering up every piece of data it could find on the World Wide Web. This was a year after the movie Minority Report came out, and basically the TIA was the concept of surveillance at scale. They would pull down emails, financial records, travel data, social media, everything you can think of to create a massive database that could predict terrorist attacks before they happened. It got shut down in 2003 after massive public backlash over privacy concerns, but a lot of people believe the program just went underground and continued under different names. That makes the timing of Palantir's founding pretty convenient, doesn't it? By the way, Palantir's premier product is called Palantir Gotham, an AI-ready operating system designed for defense, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies to integrate, analyze, and visualize massive, fragmented datasets in real time. Datasets like emails, financial records, travel data, social media, all that stuff. So that's cool, that's fine, definitely not coincidental. On February 2004, Something Awful user Nub Destroyer attempts to get 4chan shut down by emailing GoDaddy, the registrar of 4chan.net. He is successful, and 4chan moves to 4chan.org, where it remains today. If I had to hazard a guess, it was because Moot made a thread in ADTRW where he promotes 4chan as a new website that he's made. And that probably annoyed some long-standing Something Awful users who typically hate self-promotion. It makes a lot of sense that he would advertise there. A lot of ADTRW posters were already pretty familiar with the concept of an image board, having been exposed to Futaba Channel and 2channel. In fact, he advertised it as an English 2chan in his Something Awful thread. Lotax was also pretty heavy with the ban hammer at this time, and he was growing very trigger-happy about banning people for posting anime if it crept ever so slightly out of ADTRW. At this point in time, most ADTRW posters kept to themselves in their own subforum, posting about anime and anime girls, and also posting a lot of hentai, which people didn't like, a lot of them raising concerns about what they described as blatantly pedophilic imagery. So you would end up with a lot of non-ADTRW folk coming into that subforum to argue about what they called the pedo thread, basically creating a massive pedophile versus anti-pedophile civil war. Another thing that happened was a lot of folks would lift image macros, which is what we called memes back then, it was the style at the time, from places like 2chan and post them on Something Awful. Lotax would come in and be super pissed off about what he would consider a low-effort attempt at humor, so he'd ban folks for that too. Obviously, all of this starts annoying the ADTRW natives who don't like being in the firing line, and a lot of them start hanging out in other places. At the time, a lot of Something Awful subforums had offsite FTP servers and IRC channels and the like. ADTRW's offsite activity, where a lot of these banned posters fled to, took place on a spot called Raspberry Heaven, named after the ending song for the anime Azumanga Daioh. Fun additional fact, Azumanga Daioh is the anime that gave us the term waifu. Lotax's hatred of nuanced moderation eventually led to him placing a blanket site-wide ban on hentai images of a childlike nature. Sure, it might technically be legal, but the arbiter of justice on the site was an abusive man-child in his late 20s, so posting it will still earn you a one-way trip to the Shadow Realm. What this meant for the next few months is there was effectively an uneasy truce between ADTRW and the rest of the site. As long as the hentai was contained, you might be okay. You would still have people trying the usual "she's not a real child" stuff, but they just kept posting, and it got bad enough that eventually Lotax decided he was finished with trying to keep a lid on it and declared a complete and total ban on hentai. Effectively saying, fuck it, no more hentai, no more furries, if you post that shit, even in ADTRW, permaban. This kicks off a period known as the pedo cost. This is a period of time where a lot of people posting pedophile-adjacent hentai get permabanned from Something Awful. If my timing is right, it all starts from a guy called Marshall Banana. Marshall was really popular with the ADTRW crowd, mostly because of his massive hentai collection that he shared with everyone. Unfortunately, he also had a gimmick where he pretended to be a pedophile, while also stating that he was going to college to become a kindergarten teacher. It should come as no surprise that some people were really mad about this gimmick, and eventually Lotax says something along the lines of, "Find me a reason to ban him, and I will." A different Something Awful subforum known as FYAD, or Fuck You and Die, turns up ready to do their part. They go through Marshall's personal server and eventually dig up what is a bunch of suspicious-looking Xenogears hentai. Records are spotty on the exact details, but for Lotax that's enough. He considers that a solid smoking gun, and Marshall Banana is nuked from orbit in August of 2004. Next up against the wall is a man named Cortana, also known as Aubrey Coddle. Better known today as the founder of 420chan, Cortana has recently tried to make a bit of a face turn as an ethical hacker and has been a public face of Anonymous. He's currently facing court dates for breaching his bail conditions and is trying to pump and dump an Anonymous-themed crypto coin along with those milady weirdos. Cortana was permabanned on the same day for basically being Marshall Banana's right-hand man. He was the guy providing hosting for Marshall's hentai, at least. The internet has kind of forgotten this, because he's obviously gone on and done other projects, but this is all recorded in Something Awful's on-site encyclopedia. For a period of 9 months or so, Lotax continues permabanning people from the forum for various hentai-related offenses. There is a long-standing rumor that Moot was banned by Lotax as well, but that doesn't appear to be the case as his account is untouched. What happens here is a lot of these banned people, pedophile or not, start flocking to 4chan, and these ex-ADTRW posters and Raspberry Heaven inhabitants end up doing what I've dubbed the fusion dance of perverts. A lot of people end up going there because it's a place where they can post pictures of anime girls without being banned, and also some pedophiles definitely go there too. It's here that the first domino is well and truly tipped. My position is that the seed of 4chan has been sown in poisonous soil, its initial launch audience effectively locked in by Lotax banning dozens of the internet's most notorious anime pedophiles. The question I have for you all is, do you think 4chan would have had a different start and a different ending if it had a different seed audience? One thing I'm hung up on is, as I've previously pointed out, 4chan had already created and then deleted a lolicon board back in 2003. Maybe that is just a coincidence. The alternative scenario here is 4chan could have just withered and died because it never got that critical mass of people going to it, and I think that this infusion of members scorned by Lotax kept them alive to become what we know and love today. There is one question that I ask, more than I should. Do you think Moot ever sits back and recreates the Oppenheimer stare because of the website he's created? I found a Reddit AMA from him in 2011 where he's asked, "What do you think 10 years from now the lasting cultural legacy of 4chan will be?" His answer was that it shaped net and IRL culture in a way that few other communities and websites have. And obviously he's right. We're going to keep moving down the calendar. In 2005, a man by the name of Steve Bannon secures $60 million in funding from Goldman Sachs to invest in a company called Internet Gaming Entertainment, or IGE. IGE was a company that traded in virtual goods, things like World of Warcraft gold. They quite literally hired third worlders to gold farm in WoW and sell it to Western players for real money. Not just WoW either, they dealt in currency and items for EverQuest, Lineage 2, and any other MMO they could get their grubby hands on. At its peak, IGE was pulling in around $100 million a year. The whole operation was basically a digital sweatshop. Workers in places like China grinding 12-hour shifts for a few dollars a day, so American teenagers could buy their epic amounts without any hassle. The company was, to the surprise of no one, incredibly controversial in gaming communities. They were seen as actively ruining game economies and violating terms of service on a massive scale. But from Bannon's perspective, it was a literal goldmine. After this, Steve goes on to be an integral part of the American conservative news network Breitbart. This is some crucial world building for Steve Bannon. It's important to note what he was up to at the time, and we'll come back to what he learned from his time selling WoW gold later. Specifically, what he learned about young disaffected men spending hours online in insular communities. 2005 kicks off what I would call the golden age of 4chan. Over the next 6 years is when it's at the idealized peak that I remember. Think your pools closed, your chanologies, anonymous, all of that stuff. It's also during this time we get the rise of weird Twitter. A lot of the original inhabitants of that part of the internet were former Something Awful users, or at least connected to Something Awful, like this guy. In 2006, the FBI launches what they're calling Operation Leap Year, their investigation into Jeffrey Epstein after parents of a 14-year-old girl reported being molested at his Palm Beach mansion. By 2007, federal prosecutors had prepared a draft indictment against Epstein and 2 of his employees for enticement of minors and sex trafficking. This draft described Epstein as an extremely high flight risk and, from information we have received, a continued danger to the community. And it's here where it gets interesting. U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, who later became Donald Trump's labor secretary, cuts him a deal. A very, very good deal. Epstein pleads guilty to just 1 count of soliciting prostitution from someone under 18, and he gets an 18-month sentence. And under a secret non-prosecution agreement, the federal charges all just disappear. Acosta has later said that he offered this lenient plea deal because he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence. And it's worth noting that the FBI had identified statements from 24 women who reported being abused by Epstein as minors and 14 who reported being abused as adults. Epstein serves most of his sentence in a work release program where he gets to leave jail during the day. In 2010, Mark Andreessen invests $625,000 in Christopher Pool's startup Canvas, later rebranded as DrawQuest. Canvas was an image board that allowed for anonymous and non-anonymous sharing and remixing of posted images with built-in image editing tools. The idea was to take what worked about 4chan, all of the creative chaos and meme culture, and make it more palatable for normies. DrawQuest fully launched in 2013 as an iPad app that presented users with daily challenges. You'd get a template, say a spaceship, and then when you filled it in, you'd publish it to the community. It was trying to ride the wave of apps like Draw Something, but with a creative community twist. The whole thing had crashed and burned by January 2014. Canvas had been downloaded 1.4 million times and was being used by about 25,000 people a day, but they couldn't figure out how to monetize it and keep it profitable. The important thing I need to note here is Moot needed to fund this somehow, which is what I think shapes the next few years we're about to go through. So, back in 2010, newly released DOJ files show Epstein maintained a World of Warcraft account around this time. Not really relevant, I just thought it was funny, and I mark 2011 as the end of 4chan's golden age. Moot closed the new board on January 17, 2011. He says this is because the board had become devoted to racist discussions, so much so that other users were calling it Stormfront after the white nationalist website. Despite warnings from Moot to keep discussions focused on actual news, the board remained very strongly racism-oriented, and then it got closed. I am now going to say the most cursed sentence I think I will utter on this channel. Poll was created after Moot met with Jeffrey Epstein. How much they actually met seems very murky, and when they first met is unclear. Digging through the files, on the 20th of October 2011, Boris Nikolic, a venture capitalist and former advisor to Bill Gates, sent Epstein the Wikipedia page for Moot, writing, "There is a cool guy, kid, that you should meet." Boris was named as the potential executor in Jeff's will, by the way. While he does say he has no idea why he was named, that's not really something you just randomly sign someone up for when you're writing your will. 4 days later, Boris followed up by asking Epstein, "How did you like Moot? He was very sensitive, so be gentle." Epstein replied, "I liked him a lot. I drove him home, he is very bright." And here's where it gets really weird. October 23rd, 2011, Moot launches Poll, 4chan's politically incorrect board. Basically, the same board he'd previously deleted for being too racist, brought back under a new name the day after he met with Epstein. The same board that would become a staging ground for things like Gamergate, the 2016 Trump campaign, and the global online alt-right movement. 4 days after Epstein met with Poole, Nikolic emailed Epstein again. This article describes why I find Moot interesting. The potential for manipulation is huge, linking to a Washington Post article about how 4chan had been used to foment bigotry and launch cyber attacks. The timing is suspicious, to say the least. Epstein was already a known sex criminal at this point, so the question I would have to ask is what motivation would Moot have to meet with him? Was he meeting with Epstein in his capacity as a powerfully connected financier? After all, he'd already gotten the initial funding in 2010 from Andreessen and others, and in June 2011 he'd raised another $3 million in a Series A round of funding led by Union Square Ventures' Fred Wilson and Andreessen Horowitz. When you slot this new piece of knowledge into the rest of the timeline, it makes that whole period of poll reopening and the connection it has to everything else further down the line that much more sinister. Even more so when you get that email from Boris on the 28th stating the potential for manipulation will be huge. Where the rest of Moot's involvement lies here is incredibly murky. He has given so few interviews and has been on camera so few times over the decades, we don't know a ton about his character. In June 2016, he became a partner at Google's in-house incubator, Area 120, and in 2018 he became a product manager for Google Maps. He left Google on April 13, 2021. Since then, he's gone quiet. Poole has deliberately stepped away from the public eye after his time at Google ended. I don't even know if he's still alive, which is the crazy part. 4chan is banned from almost every major payment processor that you can name. It's always been pretty precarious. Western payment processors are not fans of the site. That gives me questions about the timing of Poll being launched and the funding of Canvas and DrawQuest. It almost feels too good to be true, and I think we will never know for certain. It aligns with Silicon Valley VCs being a bit edgy and trying to moonshot on some strange apps, and it aligns with Andreessen's recent pivot towards vice signaling. It all comes back to that single email from Boris. The potential for manipulation will be huge. Before we finish off this year, the back half of the year, I need to point out that it was massively overshadowed by Occupy Wall Street. If you're not quite old enough to remember, Occupy Wall Street was a left-wing populist and progressive movement against economic inequality and capitalism. Fun or not so fun fact, Poll was made within a month of Occupy Wall Street starting. I didn't bring up Occupy during the first edition of this video, but after meditating on it, I think it was worth making a note of it because it aligns so well with the reopening of Poll as a potential containment board for any kind of right-wing thought online, while at the same time there's some interesting things happening with Reddit's moderation. I'll cover that half of the equation around the time Ghislaine Maxwell gets arrested. Going through to 2012, one of the moderators of Something Awful's politics subforum called Sean Smith was killed during the September 11th attack on the US consulate in Benghazi, Libya. Smith was an information management officer with the United States Foreign Service, ensuring the electronics there ran smoothly and securely. He was also a massive figure in the EVE Online community, where he went by the name Vile Rat. Also, this is his Vile Tat. He was one of the most influential diplomats in the game, serving as the chief diplomat for the Goon Swarm Federation, the largest alliance in the game, and Something Awful's, representative alliance. On the day of his death, he typed a message to the rest of the directors in that corporation that read, "Assuming we don't die tonight, we saw one of our police that guard the compound taking pictures." Conservative talk show host Glenn Beck accused Smith of being a CIA operative. He believed Smith's final words to everyone else in EVE Online was a coded call to the CIA for help, and that Smith himself was a CIA man in Benghazi as part of a mission to cover up the Obama administration's involvement in the Libyan uprising. Sure, I guess, thanks Glenn. Not quite on board, but that being said, I think it's a little suspicious that a guy is just hanging around in a hot zone embassy with the job title Information Management Officer. And the gaming community organized a fundraiser that raised over $100,000 in 2 days for his family. Shoot blues, tell Vile Rat. On December 25th, 2012, Christmas Day, Elon Musk sent an email to Jeffrey Epstein at 6 a.m. asking, "Do you have any parties planned?" Musk wrote, "I've been working to the edge of sanity this year, and so once my kids head home after Christmas, I really want to hit the party scene in St. Bart's or elsewhere and let loose." The invitation is much appreciated, but a peaceful island experience is the opposite of what I'm looking for. Epstein responded with, "Understood, I'll see you on St. Barth. The ratio on my island might make Tallulah uncomfortable," referring to Musk's then-wife Tallulah Riley. Musk replied saying the ratio is not a problem for Tallulah, and the ratio Epstein was concerned about is, well, I'll make you think of that what you will. 2013 is a big year. Unfortunately, the DOJ's release of more Epstein files documents have added a lot more steps here. The website 8chan, now known as 8kun, is founded by Frederick Brennan, aka Hot Wheels. Brennan considered 4chan to have grown into an authoritarian site, and he described 8chan as a free speech-friendly alternative. His pitch was pretty simple. 8chan would let anyone create their own board about anything with minimal moderation. If he got banned from 4chan for being too porn-obsessed or too racist or too whatever, 8chan was the new home for you. Brennan built it as a decentralized image board where users could create and moderate their own boards with almost no oversight. The site's tagline was literally, "Embrace infamy." Also in 2013, Bobby Kotick, the disgraced former CEO of Activision, sent a message to Jeffrey Epstein about incentives and real-world rewards, including virtual items in-game, which Jeffrey then forwarded to futurist Pablo Holman. Holman responded saying he was all for indoctrinating kids into an economy. Now, the claim that Epstein designed or was solely responsible for microtransactions is a little overstated, but I do like being able to throw a stone at a problem and go, yeah, probably a pedophile is involved. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 had already introduced microtransactions in 2012, so this was before that conversation happened, but when a convicted sex trafficker and one of the most notorious pedophiles in the world is discussing strategies to indoctrinate kids into an economy with video game executives, I think it's worth noting, even if he didn't invent the practice, he was very clearly interested in it. All this and his Xbox account ends up getting banned anyway. It's also time to do our best staff member at Little St. James impression and say, "Welcome back, Peter Thiel." He's funding Hulk Hogan's side of the Balea v. Gawker lawsuit because Gawker outed him as gay, and he saw this as an opportunity to have some revenge. He does get a bit more involved in politics publicly from here onwards, but he's still a very shadowy figure. His main method is kind of meddling in the background like a libertarian vampire, and yes, emailing Epstein along with the rest of them. Palantir isn't really public-facing yet at this point. They're mostly working as a military contractor. I just keep mentioning Palantir and Theil because it gets connected to a lot of the other major players online throughout the years. Also, in November of 2013, Jean-François Gorepi, I can't pronounce French names, I hope that's correct, would later become a prominent alt-right YouTuber and race science enthusiast, reaches out to Epstein requesting funding. Garepi? French people help. Jean-François was a neuroscience PhD at the time, and he was looking for research money. He wouldn't really hit his stride as an online personality until a few years later, where he'd become a regular fixture in the race realism circles on YouTube. The fact that Epstein was already seen as a potential funding source for this kind of research tells you something about the networks that were forming. Around this time, Leslie Groff, one of Epstein's assistants, sends 3 girls' passports to Elon's assistant. And then on March 2nd, 2014, there's that one infamous photo of Elon Musk with Ghislaine Maxwell at the Vanity Fair's Oscar party. Very legitimate photograph taken by wire image photographer Kevin Mazur. Very intentionally shot. These aren't paparazzi candids, this is a professional photographer at a high-profile event. When asked about it in 2020, Musk claimed he didn't know Maxwell and that she had photobombed him, but I find that hard to believe. There's no way he didn't know her at this point in his life. After emailing Epstein about island parties and having his assistant receive passports from Epstein's staff, I find it bizarre that we would be expected to believe a photo of Maxwell at one of the biggest celebrity events of the year was just an accident. Please bear in mind that Epstein had a calendar entry in 2014 that shows Elon Musk to Ireland December 6. It's very hard to believe him here. On the 19th of February 2014, the chairman of 2channel's domain registrar seizes the domain due to apparent unpaid debts. This man, known as Jim Watkins, takes full control of the website in what is effectively a hostile takeover. In doing so, he relieves Hiroyuki Nishimura of all power and assumed the role of website administrator. And to avoid potential legal issues, Jim eventually changed the name. A couple of years later, they redirected everything to the 5channel domain. This same year, a second CIA connection appears with regards to something awful. Brown Moses was a moderator of the debate and discussion subforum, same as VileRat, and he kind of convinces a bunch of Something Awful members to do a bunch of OSINT work during the Syrian civil war. He goes on to found Bellingcat, a Netherlands-based open source intelligence group. Now, I was a little flippant about them in my first video about this, which was a mistake. I don't think they're feds, but places like three-letter agencies love OSINT networks for plausible deniability reasons. In a 1991 interview with the Washington Post, the National Endowment for Democracy founder Alan Weinstein said, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA." Higgins himself has stated that the NED does fund some specific programs like training Russian language journalists in verification and open source investigation techniques, so They're not feds, but if you've ever played Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, where you end up doing a lot of jobs for Cypher, the guy you hate, it's kind of like that. You're not working for them, but somehow the funding keeps appearing. I'm keeping this Bellingcat stuff in here mostly as a reference point to show the wider influence of Something Awful and how it connects to different parts of the internet culture and the real world events. This isn't directly tied to 4chan, but it's definitely part of the same universe and ecosystem we're mapping out. This is also the year where we prove that there is always more and there is always worse. 2014 is the year of Gamergate. It starts with what is now known as the Zoe post. Aaron Gajoni makes a very long post about his ex-girlfriend Zoe Quinn. He posts it on Something Awful, Reddit, 4chan, anywhere he can. In fact, he gets promptly banned from Something Awful with the reason, "Thank you for joining the Something Awful forums in order to post a giant fucking psychopathic hell dump about your ex-girlfriend in the forum about video games." He continues cross-posting everywhere else, kicking off the video game culture war that was apparently about ethics in video game journalism. It's at this point where I get to remind you all that some of my takes are not going to align with yours, and you might not like them. We're going to disagree on a lot of specifics. Gamergate's actually one of the few Something Awful encyclopedia entries to have their original definitions deleted. It was just goatsy, and it should have stayed that way. There are some people who genuinely believed it was about ethics in video game journalism. They got some transparency from game journalist sites and moved on with their lives. The ones who stuck around and kept fighting, it turns out Steve Bannon was piloting that entire movement like a Gundam. Remember him, our WoW gold seller from earlier? Well, Steve has reappeared on the scenes. He's put a lot of effort into manipulating Gamergate as a vehicle to activate young men for Donald Trump. His main hired gun for this is Milo Yiannopoulos. Milo is an interesting character. He has stated that sexual relationships between 13-year-old boys and adults can happen perfectly consensually, and he was a key figure in driving what was a lot of Gamergate's harassment campaigns. The important thing, and why I am putting Gamergate in here, and if I was to sit here and explain what Gamergate was in any more detail, this would be a Gamergate video, was that he had identified Gamergate as a vehicle to throw his money and weight behind. He had realized during his time selling WoW Gold that the average capital G gamer at the time was ripe for this kind of political grooming. The quote from Steve that really sells this is, "These guys, these rootless white males had monster power." It was the pre-Reddit. It was the same guys on Thoughtbot who were later on Reddit. What matters here, and again, this would be a Gamergate video if I went into any more detail and not the video you're watching. What matters here is that Gamergate proved you can use semi-radicalized places like 4chan and Reddit as a launching pad for further radicalization efforts. Moot ends up banning Gamergate discussion from 4chan on September 16th, 2014. The ban came after mass reporting by Gamergate supporters broke 4chan's moderation system. A senior moderator called Rape Ape, yeah I know, that's his name, made the call and Moot backed it. This led to a lot of these Gamergate supporters migrating to 8chan and spamming 4chan for weeks in protest. Moot later cited the stress from controversies like Gamergate as a reason for stepping down as 4chan's administrator on January 21st, 2015. I think at this point he had well and truly lost control and potentially also lost any interest in the site. DrawQuest had just failed a year ago, so maybe this was the final straw that broke the camel's back and he wanted to go back to a quieter life. Because of this ban, Gamergate and Elons had moved over to 8chan, the free speech friendly alternative, giving that website its own big seed audience, much in the same way 4chan was seeded by Something Awful's ban wave. These Gamergaters start heading out into other websites, recruiting more people down the start of what becomes the alt-right pipeline, which helps because 2015 also brought the rise of what I call college tour culture. The scores of freshly radicalized Gamergaters who were just absolutely primed to hoover up clips of student protests and videos of people trying to debate controversial speakers on college campuses. Think of that big wave of SJW-owned compilations that you would have seen on YouTube a decade ago, where guys like Charlie Kirk would gish-gallop a bunch of barely literate and conscious 19-year-olds. On September of 2015, Hiroyuki Nishimura returns and, backed up by a consortium of investors, takes over as the new owner of 4chan. Fun fact, one of the investors in this consortium was the company that makes Nendoroid figgies. Yes, including Miku. It's here that 4chan begins its lurch further and further to the right, fueled by this online gamer awakening. The subreddit r/TheDonald is also founded in the middle of this year. Their mods go on to describe it as 4chan with a condom. What they mean by this is that all the edgy, transgressive posting and memes of 4chan are able to get put onto a platform like Reddit, but with a bit of plausible deniability and a little bit of moderation just so they can avoid getting completely nuked from a mainstream platform. It quickly became one of the most active political communities on Reddit, a breeding ground for Trump memes, conspiracy theories. The whole God Emperor Trump thing came out of there. By the end of 2015, you kind of get this perfect storm. Freshly radicalized Gamergaters spreading out from 8chan, college campus debate content priming people for anti-SJW politics, Hiroyuki taking over 4chan with investor backing and loosening the reins, and r/TheDonald creating a Reddit beachhead for it all to flow through. This new online landscape, freshly rocked by these campaigns and starting to form its own online identity, starts talking a lot about the concept of red pilling. This is a concept stolen from The Matrix. Red pilling is the idea that you can shock people out of progressive ideals and bring them to the based side of the political spectrum. It spreads like wildfire across 4chan, Reddit, and YouTube comment sections, becoming shorthand for political conversion through exposure to uncomfortable truths. This can be attributed pretty squarely to a quiet but very influential guy called Curtis Yarvin. He has been around since 2007, posting under the pen name Mencius Moldbug, and he's widely considered to be the thought leader of the Dark Enlightenment movement. I'm just bringing him up here because this is when his ideas really break containment and become a larger part of mainstream right-wing thought. Yarvin has been influential in guiding people like Peter Thiel and other would-be technocrats like Mark Andreessen, who have expressed an interest in establishing tech CEO dictatorships. Steve Bannon has also said he's both read and admired his work, and current Vice President J.D. Vance cites him as a key influence. This school of thought is called Dark Enlightenment, or the Neo-Reactionary Movement. It favors a return to traditional societal constructs and forms of government, such as absolute monarchism and authoritarian capitalist city-states which compete for citizens. Think of it like feudalism but with venture capitalists in the blockchain. Guys like Peter Thiel, guys like Elon Musk, and guys like Mark Andreessen, they want hyper-capitalist city-states where they, the big boys with billions of dollars, are in charge. They have all correctly identified that the internet can be used as a vehicle to spread these ideas far and wide, preparing people to accept those ideas. The beauty of it, from their perspective, is you don't actually need to convince everyone at once. You just need to slowly shift the Overton window far enough that their vision of CEO god kings running private fiefdoms start to sound reasonable. Also, I found out when I was writing this that Yarvin is on record saying he was inspired by a 2005 YouTube video that contrasted modern Western decadence and filth with pictures of Nazi officers in uniforms. So, the guy behind a lot of these ideas, the weird guru that all of these right-wing politicians and billionaires look up to and take advice from, fell for propaganda aimed at 15-year-olds at the ripe old age of 32. It's strange weirdos all the way down, if it wasn't obvious at this point. And while all of this ideological groundwork is being laid, the money has started moving. Because to these guys, what is the point of having a political philosophy if you aren't funding it? They're not just posting manifestos on obscure blogs, they're building infrastructure, funding media operations, and investing in the platforms that will carry their message. In 2015, Mark Andreessen leads a $58 million investment in TransferWise via Valar Ventures. That's Peter Thiel's investment firm. The same year, the Epstein Foundation contributes $25,000 to that Jean-Francois guy's Neuro TV YouTube channel. And between 2015 and 2016, Epstein puts $40 million into two funds managed by Valar Ventures. So you've got Thiel's money, Andreessen's money, Bannon's money, Epstein's money, all flowing through the same channels, funding the same ecosystem of tech platforms and political movements. They're using Silicon Valley's hyperscaler playbook to identify an underserved market, flood it with capital, scale it rapidly, and dominate the space. We now come to 2016, where all of this culminates in Donald Trump being elected for the first time. There are a lot of factors as to why he got elected. Some people are going to attribute this win to meme magic, the idea that if you post hard enough, you can meaningfully affect the world. There's dozens and dozens of reasons why Trump wins. There's the collapse of Rust Belt manufacturing, decades of growing income inequality, a Democratic Party that abandoned its working class base, and racist backlash to Obama's presidency. But the thousands of freshly radicalized gamers making memes calling him a god emperor definitely don't hurt his campaign. Combine all that with Hillary Clinton being a dogshit candidate definitely helped too. The online machinery that had been built over the previous decade, 4chan, 8chan, r/TheDonald, the alt-right pipeline, all the red-pilling discourse, all of it had converged into a coordinated mimetic assault that helped legitimize Trump's candidacy amongst young men online, specifically. There were jokes, yes, but all of this had culminated in a permission structure for these people to support him. 2016 is also the year of the podcast. Podcasts had been around for decades before this, sure, but this is when we start seeing them get larger and larger spheres of influence in wider culture. Chapo Trap House gets started this year, and yes, they are former Something Awful guys as well. Before this year is out, Frederick Brennan officially signs 8chan over to Jim Watkins and his son Ron. Brennan had been running the site since 2013, but by this point he's burnt out from the constant legal battles, hosting issues, and the site's association with harassment campaigns and illegal content. Jim Watkins, the same guy who had seized control of 2channel a few years earlier, takes full control, and Ron becomes the site administrator. The Watkins father-son duo now control one of the internet's most notorious image boards, just as it becomes a key staging ground for far-right organizing. Which is handy because 2017 is when Trump takes office. And joining him in the White House is the chief political strategist Steve Bannon. He doesn't last very long, around 8 months, and then he's cut loose. That's more of a footnote in history because 2017 also brings the rise of QAnon, also known as the thing that drove your estranged parents bug nuts crazy. The person or persons behind Q and QAnon start posting on 4chan in late October, likely because 4chan had proven to be such fertile ground for this kind of content after the Gamergate years. Q posts cryptic messages called Q drops, claiming to be a high-level government insider with Q clearance, dropping breadcrumbs about a secret war between Trump and a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who control the world. The posts are vague enough that followers can read whatever they want into them, basically a choose-your-own-adventure conspiracy theory that lets people feel like they're part of an exclusive club of truth seekers. That being said, they moved to 8chan a month later, publicly stating that they had concerns that 4chan had been infiltrated. My personal opinion, one that is shared by numerous journalists and extremism researchers, is that either Jim or Ron Watkins know the identity of, or are themselves the person behind the Q account, and it would be easier to control the narrative on a website they owned than one they didn't. The timing lines up a little too perfectly. Q moves to 8chan right after the Watkinses take full control, and suddenly this fringe conspiracy theory starts getting a little more active and a little more professional. With the rise of QAnon, Trump allies including Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, and Kash Patel have all pushed conspiracy theories rooted in QAnon posts, helping drag its fringe narratives into the political mainstream. Flynn even took the QAnon oath on video, Sidney Powell cited Q theories in her election lawsuits, and Kash Patel has been doing Q-adjacent content on his podcast for years, but he's now the FBI director, so I guess that paid off. What started as anonymous conspiracy posting on an image board is now informing policy decisions in government. Before 2017 ends, Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein have a formal introduction. Our WoW Gold guy, who learned how to radicalize gamers, who ran Breitbart, who was Trump's chief strategist, is now in direct contact with Epstein. This meeting happens through mutual connections in their overlapping circles of tech billionaires and political operators. The emails between them after this, in 2018, show Bannon asking Epstein if he knows anyone in Europe who wants to control the European Parliament, saying he needs to get serious about taking on Soros. Epstein and Bannon are on really good terms, really quickly. Good enough terms that in November and December of 2018, there are emails that show Steve Bannon and his son Sean Bannon both receive Hermes Apple Watches from Epstein. Those run at about $1,500 each, and a couple of luxury watches might not seem like much when we're talking about two billionaires, but it's the kind of gift you give when you're maintaining a relationship. You don't send someone and their son matching Hermes watches unless you're trying to keep that connection warm. This is after Bannon's been ousted from the White House and after he's left Breitbart for a second time. But he's still deeply connected to far-right movements globally. 2019 is when things start getting messy. On May 25th, Bannon boasts to Epstein about starting a private border wall outside El Paso, part of the whole build the wall grift that he'd eventually get indicted for before Trump pardoned him. This same year, 3 mass shooters post their manifestos on 8chan before carrying out their attacks. The Christchurch mosque shooter in New Zealand, the Poway synagogue shooter in California, and the El Paso Walmart shooter all use 8chan as their launching pad, posting their manifestos and announcing their intentions on the site. 8chan, the site now owned by Jim and the site hosting QAnon, is now directly connected to mass casualty events. The site gets kicked off Cloudflare after the El Paso shooting and goes dark for months. Also in 2019, Bannon films hours of interviews with Epstein for a planned documentary called The Monsters, Epstein's Life Among the Global Elite. The documentary never gets released, but those interviews do exist somewhere. Epstein gets arrested on July of 2019 and dies in his cell a month later in August. Let's jump to 2020. On June 30th, the Reddit account Maxwell Hill makes its last public post. On July 2nd, 2020, 2 to 3 days later, Glenn Maxwell gets arrested. This is going to be quite surface level, I'm just warning you because there's no smoking gun here, but there's enough circumstantial evidence that makes me squint a little bit. The Maxwell Hill account was a moderator or lead moderator of multiple major subreddits, including world news, technology, politics, travel, health, environment, bad cop, no donut, and Europe. On world news alone, Maxwell Hill's submissions make up 30% of the content. These are all highly influential, default or major subreddits, the kind that would have given that account enormous influences over what Reddit users saw. World News is one of the most trafficked news aggregation sites on the internet. The account was controversial for allegedly being an inactive lead moderator, someone who held on to senior positions without actually doing moderation work, but used that senior status to control who else became moderators and to bypass any content filters. The account had posted every single day for 14 years, and it stopped right as Glenn was arrested. There are some weird details, like significant gaps in the account's posting that line up with Maxwell's mother's death, and also her attendance at a Kleiner Perkins party where Ellen K. Powell was reported seeing Maxwell. The user behind the account claims to have been born in December, and Ghislaine Maxwell's birthday is December 25th. There are no smoking guns and there's no hard evidence, and it makes you sound crazy to talk about it, but until hard evidence proves otherwise, it's very compelling. And if it is her, then one of Jeffrey Epstein's key accomplices spent 14 years shaping what millions of Reddit users saw on their front page every single day. After Trump lost the 2020 election, the QAnon crazies of the world decide to have a field trip to the Capitol on the 6th of January 2021. A Stop the Steal rally turns into a full-blown insurrection, complete with zip ties, gallows, and people smearing shit on the walls. The whole thing is organized through social media, Telegram, Parler, Facebook groups, Reddit, and of course the Chans. Years of QAnon posting had primed these people to believe that Trump was fighting a secret war against the cabal of pedophiles and that the election had been stolen as part of this grand conspiracy. They genuinely believed that they were the heroes of the story and they were saving democracy by storming the Capitol. The storm was finally here. Except it wasn't. There was no mass arrests, there were no revelations, the sun is going down, and your roommate in your one hotel wants to show you his Goblin Slayer torrents. And also everyone else is getting arrested for federal crimes. The last widely recognized, unquestionably canonical Q drop happens in December 2020, right before the insurrection. After January 6, radio silence. I think whoever was running the Q account realized the game had gone too far and it was time to quietly step away before the FBI started asking a few hard questions. We do enter the years of rapid Brandonization and things don't really get better for the average person in society. Peter Thiel returns to the scene. I say returns because we haven't seen him publicly, but he's still working in the background, pulling strings and funding projects. But in 2021, he backs J.D. Vance's Senate election campaign to the tune of $15 million. I charitably say back because it's more of an investment. J.D. Vance was the guy who wrote Hillbilly Elegy and spent years positioning himself as a compassionate chronicler of working class struggles. Suddenly pivots hard towards Trumpism with Thiel's money behind him. He went from never Trump to full-blown Make America Great Again almost overnight, because that's what $15 million buys you. And remember, Vance has explicitly cited Curtis Yarvin as a key influence. These donations help put Vance to the US Senate in 2022, and a few years later he becomes Trump's vice president. Peter Thiel now has his guy one missed heartbeat away from the presidency. Also in 2022, Elon Musk, who's Thiel's ex-business partner, buys Twitter for $44 billion, and he immediately begins actively manipulating the Overton window of that site. He reinstates banned accounts, including Donald Trump and Andrew Tate, and a whole roster of far-right personalities who've been kicked off for violating terms of service. He changes the algorithm to boost his own posts and posts of accounts he agrees with. He starts personally replying to and signal-boosting right-wing memes and conspiracy theories. The guy who owns the platform is using it like his personal megaphone to shift what he considers acceptable political discourse, and by this point, Elon's just fucking melted himself on 4chan, just cooked himself on trip fagging and ketamine. He's posting edgy Chan humor, he's doing based and red-pilled things, he's engaging with Pepe posters. The richest man in the world is terminally online in the worst possible way. And he now owns one of the most influential social media platforms on the planet, and he's using it to mainstream ideas that used to live in the darkest corners of the internet. Twitter has now become another vector for the same kind of radicalization pipeline that 8chan and 4chan had perfected, except now it's got Elon's money and reach behind it. And by the time we get to 2024, social media hasn't really improved. In fact, if anything, it's gotten worse. Twitter is now X, and it's basically a right-wing echo chamber. Facebook and Instagram are becoming flooded with AI-generated slop and engagement bait, and TikTok's algorithm is feeding people increasingly extreme content to keep them scrolling. And all the while, the US has kicked off the process for it to be sold to Oracle, where it is today. Reddit's major subreddits are still being shaped by power moderators with unclear affiliations. YouTube's recommendation algorithm is still funneling people down radicalization pipelines. The online world is completely cooked, and dissatisfied voters don't engage with the Democratic Party campaign because they suck and couldn't organize a piss-up in a brewery. They're running on "We're not Trump" again. They're ignoring legitimate economic anxiety and then offering nothing to young men who've spent a decade being told they're the problem. The Democrats lost the online culture war years ago and have never bothered to fight back. They haven't built alternative platforms, they haven't funded left-wing content creators, they haven't taken the Chan to pipeline to mainstream threat seriously until it's way too late. So Trump handily wins this election, and this time he's got a whole infrastructure in place. Elon controls Twitter, Theil's guy is his VP, he's got a whole podcast ecosystem amplifying his message, he's got years of QAnon believers primed to accept whatever he says. The groundwork that started with low-tax banning hentai, that grew through Gamergate and then metastasized through QAnon, all pays off to where we are now. The end of 2025 and the start of 2026 is why I had to make a second version of this video. And on January 30th, 2026, they released 3.5 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos. That's where the Moot to Epstein connection is found, and forced me to make the second version of the video. We're still processing what's in there. We probably will be for months, years. As it stands, the internet has been slowly pushed further and further to the right, either accidentally or deliberately by billionaires wanting to destabilize the current state of society and consolidate their power. And now we have receipts showing these same billionaires were all connected to Jeffrey Epstein, all moving in the same circles, all funding the same political movements. The guys building the platforms, the guys controlling the algorithm, the guys controlling the candidates, were all at the same parties, all talking to each other. We're now in the era of artificial intelligence. Theil, Musk, Andreessen, and their peers, collectively known as the Broligarchs, are investing billions of dollars into AI and data centers. They're not subtle about it either. They're building massive GPU clusters that are poisoning people in Middle America. They're lobbying to deregulate AI development. They're positioning themselves to control the infrastructure of whatever comes next. Weirdly, Steve Bannon has been against it, thinking the issue will cost Republicans in future elections. He's one of the few in this crowd who see AI as a political liability rather than an opportunity, probably because he's more focused on the immediate culture war than long-term technocratic takeover. But for Theil, Musk, and Andreessen, this movement towards LLMs has a massive positive side effect for them. It lets them manipulate any narrative they want to at scale. They can flood social media with AI-generated content, they can generate synthetic consensus, they can astroturf movements. You can generate endless variations of propaganda tailored to individuals. It's the logical endpoint of everything they've been building towards, pushing this dark enlightenment ideal, not through convincing people one by one, but by controlling the information environment itself, and this is now sounding like a Metal Gear Solid 2 cutscene. This is obviously a concern for us all, and almost every single big name in this video is on record as visiting and emailing Jeffrey Epstein. Bill Clinton was on the Lolita Express 17 times. This isn't just me using it as a gavel against Trump and his ilk. It's pretty heinous across the board. Democrats, Republicans, tech CEOs, scientists, celebrities, academics. This guy was a node in every elite network that mattered. We have multiple podcasters in the administration for some reason, and they all have terrible taste. Look at Kash Patel's challenge coin. Curtis Yarvin was an informal guest of honor at Trump's inauguration. The neo-reactionary movement has a massively outsized level of influence in the government now. Yarvin has a connection to Peter Thiel. I mentioned Peter Thiel so much in Palantir. Palantir's a little spooky. 95% of it's just Salesforce, but for bombing people. Peter Thiel's still 100% weird about the Antichrist. And oh yeah, Discord's new age verification rollout is connected to a company called Persona, whose investors include Peter Thiel. They're all connected to each other. They all have vested interests in manipulating things online, and they all have the money, connections, and influence to shape it the way they want. I think there has been legitimate capture by people in Epstein and Maxwell's wider network, poisoning the well on the right and left respectively. They didn't invent the ideologies of these sites whole cloth. I think if you are of the opinion that 4chan's racism problem was invented on Little St. James, then I think you've gone too far down that rabbit hole. But the safe assumption you can make, in my opinion, is that they wanted to poison both wells, ensuring 4chan remained mired in racism and extremism, while serving as one of the only havens for online right-wing thought that wasn't Conservapedia or FreeRepublic.com. And the same goes on the other side with Reddit, with places like r/World News having any vague sense of pragmatic leftism defanged from them, leaving it as a turbo-lib hell site that's ineffective at actually organizing or pushing for meaningful change. All of this in the name of preserving their power that they and their class holds. Remember that one email from Boris? This article describes why I find Moot interesting. The potential for manipulation is huge. What I think I can safely say is this. I don't think you would have had the insanely ultra-online Make America Great Again movement that we have now being used as a vehicle by the Dark Enlightenment movement without something like QAnon. And we would not have had QAnon being able to spread as far as it did without movements like Gamergate. Because Gamergate proved that you can manipulate online narratives at scale, with 4chan providing the launching platform for those movements. 4chan would not have been the breeding ground and launching platform that it was if it didn't get shepherded through its initial years by something awful refugees who showed up after Lotax banned hentai from a comedy forum. Obviously, it's never that simple. The world is a complex system of interconnected, moving parts. But it does make a nice, clean narrative. The only thing I can leave you with is, don't forget, the internet makes you stupid.
Walk into the bank with some shit in your pants, 'cause you had too many crystals and you somehow tried to dance. Walk up to the teller with an awkward grin on your face. Hand over the shitty check to him and it's time to get paid. But he says he can't cash it 'cause it's covered in shit. There's no way to sign it, and it's not even legible.